Mervyn LeRoy's rise from newsboy to Hollywood mogul fits the Horatio Alger story to perfection. What's more, it's true. Hawking newspapers in front of a San Francisco theater would seem an unpromising beginning on the road to the front ranks of Hollywood producer-directors. Mervyn LeRoy not only made it, he made it in near record time. He was only 28 when he directed his first movie. Reading the titles of the movies he's directed since is as nostalgic as thumbing through an old yearbook. But it was a movie he produced in 1939, The Wizard of Oz, that will keep the name of Mervyn LeRoy up in lights just as long as there's television and an eager young audience to watch.
Look at his record. You know,
Mr. LeRoy, would you want to start all over again the kind of career you've had in movies in today's circumstances? They have changed since you first started.
Yes, they have changed, but I don't think I'd like to start all over again.
Why not?
Because it's a little bit tougher these days. Because you haven't the help at the studios that we had when I started.
The help?
By the help, I mean everyone wanted to make great pictures and do things that were great entertainment, had great heart, had great love stories. And I don't like some of the things they do these days. Not that they don't make fine pictures, because they do. But I don't like some of the subjects, and maybe they wouldn't like some of my subjects. But it's a great business, the picture business. I love it. I've had a great time making pictures. I've had a lot of help from a lot of people, which I thank, but after all, the play's the thing. You've got to have it on paper.
You've been one who's not been enthusiastic about movies as a means of carrying a message. I don't know if you originated the expression of, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union, but I do know you subscribe to it. What is your philosophy about movies? What ought movies to be? The play, as you've said, entertainment?
Oh, yeah, the play's the thing. Well, listen, I made a picture called I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang that everybody thought was a message picture.
It wasn't?
It wasn't. I made it because it was a great story. I made They Won't Forget, which they thought was a message picture, which wasn't. It was a great story. I made a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. They thought was a message picture. It wasn't.
But what you were looking for then was a great story.
Great story. I still am, and I wouldn't care if it told a message in a certain way. I wouldn't care, just so it wasn't communistic or something against my country.
Don't you think there are great stories in the movies today?
I certainly do. And bad ones too.
What do you most object to with respect to today's movie making or movies?
Bad taste. You know, sex is here to stay. I'm not against sex in any possible way. But if you do it with real taste, and you do it like Romeo and Juliet, when those two kids were nude, it was like a painting. It was like an art gallery. But I don't want to see movies where they have to show everything and swear every other word, because you don't need that. I made a tough gangster picture, I guess one of the toughest gangster pictures ever made, Little Caesar. Didn't have the word damn in it even. And not that I'm against that either, if it's used in the right time, but some of these boys these days are using it too much.
Did you ever feel inhibited or limited by the restrictions upon taste in the days when you were making those great pictures?
Never, never. You see, I really only worked at 2 studios in my life, Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And of course the heads of those studios were great showmen and wanted to make great pictures. Of course everyone wants to make great pictures, we know that, but they had great taste, and they had a lot of guts, and they knew what they were doing.
What is a great picture?
What is a great picture? I guess a picture that everyone comes to see.
So if it makes money, that is popularity.
Well, you remember the story that Sam Goldwyn says. He says, I don't care if my picture makes a dime just so everybody in the world comes to see it. You know, which is a old joke, but a very good one.
You got into movie making at a very early age and with virtually no experience at movie making. You began as a newsboy, I understand.
In San Francisco, selling papers in front of the St. Francis Hotel. And then I sold them in front of the Alcazar Theater.
Was it true that you had to go to work?
Yes, sure. My father passed away and I had to go to work.
At what age?
Around 11 or 12.
You didn't finish school?
And I didn't finish any school. I never graduated from any school, but I worked hard and I studied and listened.
Studied for what?
For anything
What
that
were
I
your
could.
ambitions in those days?
To be in show business.
Why?
I don't know. I always liked show business. I did an imitation of Charlie Chaplin at the Pantages Theater in San Francisco in 1915, and there were about 600 contestants, and I won.
600 contestants.
And I won, and I didn't think I was going to win. I still have the little cup at home. At least my daughter has it. I don't have it.
That wasn't your first stage appearance. I
Oh, no.
understand that your first stage appearance was inside the theater where you sold the newspapers at the Alcazar
And Barbara
Theater.
Frecci, in a show called Barbara Frecci.
How did you get in the how did you get from the outside to the inside?
Well, Theodore Roberts, the great actor, the old great actor, always bought papers from me, and he asked me if I wanted to play a newsboy in this show. And I said, well, I'd love it, because I always wanted to act. In fact, always. And they got me in this show, and I was supposed to be up in the tree yelling, "The Yanks are coming." And the opening night at the Alcazar, I fell out of the tree. And it got such a big laugh that I think they gave me 50 cents a week more, and I fell out of the tree every show.
Do you know why you always wanted to be in show business? Were you around
My
the
cousin
theater?
was in show business, Jesse Lasky.
Oh,
That was my cousin.
Oh, I see.
Who was famous players Lasky.
Yeah.
And he was in vaudeville with his sister Blanche, and they played the trumpets and cornet. And I always wanted, I don't know, I guess we were born in show business. No one else in my family outside of Jesse was ever in show business.
That was enough, though.
That was enough.
Where did you go from when you finished playing the Alcazar? Didn't you team up? Well, I guess
Yes, I
that
did
was
with a boy named Clyde Cooper.
Yeah.
We went into vaudeville under the name of Leroy and Cooper, Two Kids and a Piano.
How old were you then?
I was about 15, 16.
And that was your job.
That was my job in vaudeville,
What
yeah.
kind of an act was it?
Piano act. He played the piano and I sang and told stories. And it would be awful today, but it was pretty good.
Why would it be awful today?
I don't know. We told little corny jokes and we sang very bad songs, I think. And we played the Pantages circuit and the Orpheum circuit.
But it was successful in those days.
Yeah, the act was, because we used to wear little Eton suits, you know, with the white collars and the short coats and the black pants. But it was fun, and I've known everybody in show business for many, 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 many years. In fact, Jack Benny's one of my closest friends.
Yeah. I suppose there came a point with this act of the two pianos where you outgrew the Eton suit.
Well, my partner's father passed away in Hayward, California. And I went into a girl act called George Choose's Night and Day. That's funny, I should say Night and Day,
Yes.
but that's true. That's what it was called. It was a girl act called Night and Day.
A girl act, is it?
Yes, you know, it was a vaudeville act with
Oh.
chorus girls and everything, and comedians and so forth. And then I went I was broke in New York, really, and I went to my cousin Jesse Lasky, who had famous players Lasky, and asked him to give me a job. He didn't want to give me a job because I was a relation. But he finally gave me a job. He loaned me the money to go back to California, which I paid him back. And it was very tough because I couldn't tell anybody he was related to me.
I see.
But I started in the wardrobe department, folding wardrobe, and I was on a camera. And then I was in the lab daubing films. You know, in those days, if you wanted a dark print for nights, you would daub the film in blue, in the blue wash. And if you wanted amber for sun, you'd daub it in the amber wash. And I just went ahead. I acted in a few pictures.
Acted in a few
Yeah.
pictures. You hadn't really been an actor up to that point, except
Except in vaudeville.
for vaudeville.
Well, I was in a picture with Wally Reed called Top Speed or Speed to Spare or something. And then I played Gloria Swanson's brother in a picture called Prodigal Daughters. And then
These silent pictures, of course. weren't
yeah,
they?
these were all silent
Yes.
pictures, sure. And then I went over to Warner Bros. And I played a jockey in a picture, Little Johnny Jones. And I just kept going from there. And Alfred E. Green, who was a wonderful director, gave me my first chance at writing gags for Colleen Moore.
Did you asked to direct pictures, as I understand it, at some point after you'd been an actor for a short time?
I what?
You asked if you could direct a picture with Colleen Moore?
Yes. And she let me do it. And I was just going to start the picture.
She was a big star in those
Oh,
days, was she not?
She got $30,000 a week when you could keep it for 10 weeks. She got $300,000 picture.
Isn't this starting at the top, more or less, when you direct a picture with Colleen Moore?
Well, I was going to direct a picture with Colleen Moore, and they fired her husband, who was the head of the studio.
Oh, I see.
So I didn't do it, but she called Dick Rowland in New York, who was the head of First National in those days, and he gave me a picture called No Place to Go with Lloyd Hughes and Mary Astor, and that was my first picture. And then later on, I directed Colleen Moore in a picture called OK.
And that's when you became a gag writer.
Comedy constructor. I didn't like the name Gag Man.
You did.
So they made it, so I made a comedy constructor.
And you did this for quite a while.
Did it for a long time, on a lot of pictures.
Then what was the break that got you out of being a comedy constructor to a director?
Well, that was it was Colleen Moore and Al Green who really did it, and which I'm very thankful for. They were wonderful people. He passed away, but she's still living here. We're very close friends, and she was one of the biggest stars was ever in our business. Few people know her today, but she's a great woman.
Yes. After you directed her in that first movie, what was the next movie that you directed? Do you recall?
After OK?
Yeah.
No, I don't know if I had it.
Wasn't it Harold Teen? Wasn't
Yeah,
that?
with Harold Teen,
Harold
with Alice
Teen.
White and Arthur Lake and that gang. Yes, we did it out here in the valley.
And only, I suppose, us older folks will recall that was a very popular comic strip.
Yes,
in
it was a
those
comic
days,
strip
yes.
by Carl Ed. I don't know how I remember that. But I did.
And then you were quite young at this point. Your first movie was directed. You directed your first movie when you were only 28 years old, as I remember.
27.
27. Well, and I didn't remember correctly.
No Place to Go.
Wasn't that unusual to have directed at that age?
I don't know if it was or not, because I wasn't worried about my age. I was worried about doing something worthwhile.
Then in 1930 it was that
Yes.
you directed Little Caesar.
That's right.
Which was a complete departure from what you had done before. These were pretty frivolous pictures up to that point.
Well,
were
it was
they
a
not?
great story and a great book, and I begged to do it, and no one else wanted to do it.
Why not?
They were afraid of it, I guess. I never been afraid to
What attracted you to the story of Little Caesar?
the power. And that one thing besides the power, I guess, that attracted me was that the words crime doesn't pay, because he got killed at the end, as you know, behind the signboard. But he was such a great actor, and it was such a great story, beautifully written, and I loved doing it. And
Was he?
that was my really first big break.
Was Edward G. Robinson well established at this point?
Well, he did a show in New York called The Firebrand. That's what I saw him in. And then we brought him out for Little Caesar.
You felt he was the right one for that role. Of course, it's a classic role, and
It sure was, and he was a classic man and a great actor with a great heart and a real pro.
after Little Caesar, you did Five Star Final, also with Edward G. Robinson.
That's right.
And this again.
That was the story of Louis Weizenkorn of the graphic. That was a true story. Five Star Final.
It was
How he ruined that family by putting it all over the papers.
That was one of the first of the tough reporter movies,
That's right.
was it not? As the Little Caesar was sort of the first of the gentleman gangster
That's right.
movies. It created a whole, almost a cliche in movie making, didn't it? As being the first.
I guess so. I hope so, anyhow.
Then it was also in 1931 that you did the movie I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang.
With Paul Muni.
You made reference to this earlier and said it was not a message movie. Again, was it the story that attracted
Oh,
you?
by far. Yes, it was a powerful story. It was a true story of a man named Burns. And we brought him out, by the way. We hid him in the studio up at the offices for 2 weeks so he could help with the script.
Hid him.
Yeah, we hid him in the offices because he was a fugitive from a chain gang. But we straightened out the chain gangs, and they warned Mr. Warner and myself that we couldn't go to Georgia because the wardens were going to arrest us. But we got that straightened out, too, because we took all the chains off the men's feet after that picture was made. So maybe that's what they call a message picture. I don't know. If it did,
But it gave you no particular satisfaction that something resulted from the
yes,
the
it
picture?
did.
It
Yes, it did. So if they call that a message picture, I guess it's a message picture because we took the chains off and the cuffs off of the men, which we did do.
The next picture that I recall was Tugboat Annie, which is something that I remember rather vividly from my childhood. Wallace Beery and Marie Dressler.
Well, that was her last picture, you know. She was very, very ill. We won't mention the word, but she could only work 3 hours a day. And she was a wonderful, sweet, darling woman. He was a roughneck, but a good actor. But I enjoyed making that picture, but I was worried every day whether the program
Why
was
did you
gonna show
enjoy
up.
it, aside from the worry?
Well, because I was working with one of the great actresses, Marie Dressler, and everybody knew that she couldn't live too long. It was a
But she
sad-
was a great
oh,
actress.
and how. And she and Wally were a great team together, you know, just a great team. The picture was a big success, thank goodness.
The distance from Tugboat Annie to Gold Diggers of 1933 would seem to be quite a leap. As a matter of fact, the diversity of the pictures you have directed is one of the remarkable things about it.
Well, I've never made a motion picture, the same type of motion picture twice.
Was there a reason for that?
Yes, I never wanted to make the same type of thing. Never have. Every picture I've made, if you look at my record, was a different type of picture, never the same kind. So you couldn't say it was like the Lubitsch touch or this touch. It was my touch, I guess, of doing different types of stories.
It was in your next picture, They Won't Forget, that you mentioned a little while ago, that you introduced Lana Turner.
Yes. Well, that was taken from a book called Death in the Deep South, and I changed the title with Mr. Warner to They Won't Forget. It was the Leo Frank case, you know, which was also really a true case. And I had Lana, and that's where we started The Sweater Girl with Lana, which was an accident of her walking
How
down
was
the
it an
street.
accident?
Well, she walked down the street and the music just went to her walking in her sweater. Shook a little, and from then on they called her The Sweater Girl.
Yes.
But that was really an accident.
Yes. Is it true you discovered her in a Schwab's drugstore?
No, that's not true at all. There was a man named Zeppo Marx who had an agency. And a boy
Zeppo
named-
Marx, one of the
Zeppo-
Marx
one of
brothers,
the
of
Marx
course.
brothers. He was an agent at that time. And a boy named Sally Biano, he brought her to me at the studio. I was looking for a girl who was sexy and beautiful and young, and she was it, believe me.
Yes, indeed she was.
Yes, she was.
You've discovered others, have you not?
Well, I made Clark Gable's first test for Little Caesar. They said his ears were too big. He was playing downtown the last mile at the Majestic Theater. I went backstage, and he was playing the part of Killer Mears. Had his hands up on the railings in the jail, and he really had something. And
What was that something that you felt he had?
well, he had great sympathy in his eyes. I knew he had great heart before he even opened his mouth, because you can feel that. To be a good director, or any kind of a director, I guess you have to be a little bit of a psychoanalyst or something.
Yeah.
And I went backstage to see him, and made a test of him at Warner Brothers. And Mr. Zanuck and Mr. Warner thought his ears were too big. That's how he lost Clark. But I made a couple of pictures with him later.
Oh, you lost him at that time, though.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes.
I lost him at that time.
Did you feel you had as much freedom as you needed to make the pictures you wanted?
I always had freedom, but Mr. Warner and Irving Thalberg at Metro were always a lot of help. I think that Irving Thalberg was one of the great men of our business. You very seldom hear his name anymore, but he never had his name on anything, for that matter.
Why not?
Well, he never wanted his name on anything. But Jack Warner was a great showman. Great showman. L.B. Mayer was a great showman. There were a lot of great showmen in those days. And all I can say now, and the reason that the picture business now is coming to independent production more than it ever has, is because the running of studios now is run by businessmen more than real creators. And you need creators to do anything. I'm not a businessman. I'm a very bad businessman, but I know story ethic, and I know value, and I know people. But I want somebody else to handle my business. Sure, you have to have great men to head of the studios, which we do have, but they're not enough real creators the way we used to have.
More businessmen and fewer creators.
Yes, very much so.
Who was the greatest actor or actress you directed?
Oh, you put me in a spot there. But
There were many great ones, I'm
there
sure.
were many great ones, yes. Vivian Leigh, Greer Garson, Gene Simmons, Carol Lombard, Rosalind Russell. So many, you know,
Yes.
that I can't remember them all right now. But I never really had a bad actress in front of me.
Do you regret that we no longer have the star system?
I sure do. Because the star system was really something. Because you made people stars, if they had anything. Of course, an actor or an actress is made by the public. They have to feel the people.
They make the star.
They make the star. But when they make the star, then make them a star. Have them dress well, have their hair dressed nice. Not like running around with slacks all the time. Not that I'm against slacks, but make them real stars. You look at Gloria Swanson today, she still looks like a star. Joan Crawford looks like a star. Loretta Young looks like a star. A lot of the girls all the time, they dress like stars. They still are stars. When they walk in a room, they're stars. And men, too. You take Gable and Tracy and Cary Grant and all of them. They still look like stars. But there are very few big stars today, which is good in a way because the play's getting to be the thing much more than it used to be. And I've always been a great believer in the writer. As I say, Shakespeare agrees with me, the play's the thing.
Let me ask you about a writer, the author of The Wizard of Oz. What brought you to produce that?
Frank Baum?
Yes, you didn't direct it, you produced that one.
Yes, I directed a few little scenes in it after Victor Fleming had to go away. But I always wanted to make The Wizard of Oz since I was a kid. I always loved the Oz books. In fact, I have the original Oz books that I had when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Really?
I still have the books for my grandchildren and my kids. And The Wizard of Oz is a very simple story. The whole story of The Wizard of Oz is there's no place like home. And that's the whole story of The Wizard of Oz. Now I've got another story I want to do, James Thurber's 13 Clocks.
Wonderful.
Which is a beautiful story. It takes place in a little town called Once Upon a Time. And you have to build this town. You have to visualize. It took me 5 years to get The Wizard of Oz on. You know, you say you want to make a fairy story, everybody thinks you're crazy. But from a gangster story to a fairy story, it's...
Did they think you were crazy when you cast Judy Garland?
Yes, at first they did, because I saw Judy in a movie that she made a 20th century called The Pigskin Parade, where she sang in front of like a cheerleader. She was really it. And
you knew when you saw her in this that this is...
You bet your life. And I had to fix all her teeth. All her teeth were broken in front. But she was one of the greatest stars, I think, that ever lived.
Do you take any particular satisfaction from the pictures you've made, and there are a good many more we haven't mentioned? Is there any one that you think back upon that you say, I'm awfully happy I made that picture particularly?
Well, it's a very funny thing and a very funny thing to answer, but I never made a picture I didn't like. Not that they were all great pictures, but I never made one that I didn't feel I could do something with.
Including the early Joey Brown pictures?
Oh, sure, they were great. Had a lot of fun with Joey Brown. He just passed away a few weeks ago.
Yes,
you know.
yes.
And, oh, sure, they were fun. Every picture's been fun for me.
You believe very strongly in work.
I love to work. I still am working hard. I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't work.
What do you do now?
Looking for stories all the time. I read every night.
Where do you look? What kind of stories are you looking for?
Anything that I feel is entertainment. And it's very hard. There are very few stories written that are really great today. Right now, though, there's an awful lot of pictures out that are awfully good.
What makes good acting?
Heart.
Not technique?
I don't believe in acting schools. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but I never have. But I think acting schools are all right if you don't want to learn speech or something, but you don't learn to act. You have to feel to act. I can take any girl or any boy, if they have any heart, I can make them act. Not make them act, just help them.
How do you know if they have heart or not when you audition them?
Well, you have them read for you, and you talk to them a while, and you feel whether a person has any definite something. When Lana Turner first walked in my office, I knew she was it before she opened her mouth. It's something that God gave me, I guess, that I've been very lucky with.
Do you regret at all, or has it been a handicap at all, not having had that formal education, or have you gotten it along the way?
Well, I've gotten it along the way, I hope. See, my son graduated from Stanford, my daughter graduated from Smith. I would have liked to have gone to college, but I think if I went to college, I wouldn't be here today with you. I wouldn't be that lucky.
Is that right?
That's
It would
how
have
I
made
feel.
that difference.
I think so, because I had to work. I had to get out and I had to learn everything. And a lot of
You've said that a kid has to do it himself. No one does it for him.
That's right. My kid has done it himself.
Do you think the opportunities today are any less than they were when you rose from newsboy to movie producer, director?
Yes, I do think they're harder today.
Why is that?
Well, there's not enough studios and not enough stories and not enough people to help people.
Help. That's terribly important.
Very. I was given a lot of help. As I told you before, Al Green, Colleen Moore, I had a lot of people to help me on the way. And I try to help people.
I'm told you have an open door, that you...
I sure have. I try to help anyone, but because you've got to have a great backfield to make pictures. You've got to have a great team behind that chair. Your cameras, your cameramen, your assistants, your writers, everything. It's almost like a football team. You've got to have a great backfield. You can't do it yourself. And I know I've never tried to do it myself. I've always gotten help, the best that I could buy.
Where do you think motion pictures are going? You've spoken of the things you don't like about some of the trends in today's movie
Oh, I think
making.
that'll straighten itself out, but motion pictures will never go. Nothing will stop entertainment. I think everything is getting better. I think television is getting better. I think movies are getting better. And I think that as long as you have showmanship and you have great stories and you have people who know what they're doing and don't worry about camera angles, because some of these young guys today, they take a camera, they shoot it through your ear, up your nose. It doesn't mean anything at all. Get your scene first and then get your composition. Now, the cameraman who shoots a camera, no matter what kind of a cameraman he is, he has to light it right. And that's tough a lot of times. If you're going to put people in a corner where you can't put lights, that's not good at all.
But in the long run, it's the story.
It's you bet your life. Unless you have words in front of that camera, forget it.
Thank you very much.
Well, I wanted to pay you a compliment because this is one of the easiest interviews I think I've ever had in my life.
Thank you.